think that's one of the biggest traps they've got people in. And one of the biggest traps they're really going to leverage in this financial reset is they want to squeeze everybody. They are squeezing everybody. Everyone can see that happening. That will continue, and they will bail people out, save people into more dependence. That's always been my thesis, that it's not about making lots of people homeless or starving, and that leads to revolution. It's about creating the conditions where actually they need to be bailed out and, as we know, saved into the new system.
Okay, here we are, back from camp out. I'd love to say fresh from camp out, but I'm still recovering. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we just had a 4-day event last weekend where we had talks, discussions, workshops, wellbeing activities, music, entertainment, a full-on beautiful experience over the course of 4 days. I was there for 7 days to prep and set up and deliver and then pack down. Just still processing all the wonder that happened and coming back to good night's sleep and feeling healthy this morning, actually, Sam, which is good. But just I've detached from the real world for a little bit. But Sam, you gave your talk at the event, which went down incredibly well. And I thought it'd be lovely to kind of dissect some of the things that we picked up during the course of your experience at Camp Out and bring it to the Uncharted Territory audience so that we can start to make sense of how we can support each other on this journey of decentralization. So firstly, Sam, huge thank you for being part of the Camp Out experience. So well received. I'd love to hear about your experience at the event.
Well, firstly, Dan, thanks for putting it on, and no wonder you're tired, because it was a tour de force to pull off an event of that magnitude and scale, and with all the different elements involved and the people, and it was a truly magical weekend, and I really enjoyed being there. I felt privileged to talk there, Dan, and what was great was I presented on Saturday morning, and I was there actually Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But in essence, because of the ethos that you'd really harnessed and sort of put out there and laid the groundwork of, it actually was a discussion, which is what I love, over the full 3 days I was there. So although I was speaking and presenting maybe an hour and a half with some Q&A, it continued, and you had the lovely hay bales dotted around. So we were able to continue those discussions, get into the weeds, into nuance, and connect with people. And I think reflecting on that and what came up for me in the discussions is going to be really helpful for us to talk about today. So I'm excited to get into it, and I loved it, Dan, and well done.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you for being there. But the one of the things that struck me is that the conversation around finance, full stop, is not usually found in these types of spaces. It's a festival style event. We were very clear that we wanted this to be felt like a community gathering, a community co-creation, but because it was slightly larger than this last year's event, it did have more of a festival style feel. And as such, people were commenting that, finance isn't usually a subject that makes it onto the program. It's almost seen as this cold, distant subject that we just have to deal with in our day-to-day life. But you brought a new energy to that by telling your stories. I thought it would be lovely just to kind of get your introduction to how you actually came into crypto and finance and how you ended up speaking on this subject, because it's so important the way you presented that at the event. And I think people really warmed to that idea of how important it is that we bring this conversation to the public space.
You're so right, Dan. And again, it's like, it is almost, as I've always said, a topic that affects absolutely all of us, is on everybody's mind, almost at some level all the time. And when we're living in an economy, we've got that practicality, but it's not something that's discussed, creatively. And it's almost like people feel very alone in thinking about it. And again, there can be that aspect of feeling like it's private, and absolutely need to respect people's privacy in that sense. But bringing the conversation is what's so rich, I think. And exactly, Dan. So that, just to explain my way into it was, it was an organic journey that surprised me a bit, because, like a lot of people in 2020, I lost all my previous income streams. I was based out in the Alps in France, and I was in the ski industry, had lots of different things going on. But obviously, when it all kicked off with the kind of COVID stuff, I came back to the UK just to really bring up, help support my family through the madness, the absolute clown world that was going on, and was really wanted to be there with them. So I left France, came back. And then obviously from there, realized I'm, like yourself, got involved in a lot of activism, Dan. I remember before we met, spotting you in London and seeing you around. We didn't know each other at that point. And I met a really great network down here in the Southeast. And, I obviously, from my own journey, had looked at the kind of financial system and the kind of issues with it. And we talked about it in our fiat currency episode quite a few years ago now. So I was aware of a lot of the issues already, and the power of the control through that debt-based fiat system. So that was a topic I was aware of for a long time. But obviously it brought it much back into frame when I came back here. I'd lost my income streams. I was, looking at crypto, interested in it when I first came back, and also had this awareness of, okay, we're definitely, my research was doing, we're definitely heading for some kind of financial reset. And that's almost, for me, was where my focus went. I could see what's happening with the COVID narrative, but I thought no one's really talking at that stage about, the sort of bigger elephant in the room, which is a financial reset. And I saw a lot of the COVID measures, Dan, like the vaccine passports, as a possible precursor for the digital ID, the digital wallet, the central bank digital currency. So kind of stepping stone towards that. So, but what's interesting for me, Dan, I was, I, like you, was obviously really keen to help communities as I could during that process, meeting a lot of good people, realized I was going to stay around because I had such a great network. I wasn't going to go back to France. It kind of felt like that was over. And then I thought, how can I help, Dan? Because we all want to help each other in this time. And, a big part of my journey was a healing journey. It's in sort of my mid-20s, into my 30s, from kind of, generalized chronic fatigue, toxicity, just issues that I wasn't getting hold of in the mainstream, and even struggling in the alternative world to get on top of. And I had a huge epiphany in sort of 16, 17 onwards for a few years, and I got into raw foods and juicing. And for me, it transformed my life then. Ended so much suffering I was going through and transformed me. And it was really about sovereign health. It was about empowerment, because actually it was me doing it to, for myself, without any practitioners, without any supplements. And so I thought, well, I can really share that journey. And I'd already thought years ago, okay, I'd love to work that in some way. And it's also, here's the ideal time. And I thought, this is really obvious. I can, obviously help educate people on my experiences, share what I've learned, and hopefully that can help some people on their healing path, outside the system, self-healing. And what was interesting, Dan, I'd had this idea for a while. I thought it's going to be so easy because I can talk about this topic. I can maybe write a little book. And I was trying to create a talk and write, and it just wasn't coming out. And it was a bit weird because I had all this info and it felt like it was ready to flood out, and it just wasn't coming out. And then, but on the side, I was obviously deeply researching the crypto, what's happening in the financial reset. And it was actually just over a curry, actually, with some other people involved in local groups around Sussex. And one of the guys there, we were having a chat about finance crypto, and, just the two of us, actually. And he said, this is a great chat. Will you come and speak to my local group? He was running a group not far from me. And I felt reticent, Dan. I thought, well, I'm not a speaker. I'm happy to chat over a curry here. He said, come along. And it spiraled from there. I went to give a talk. It went down well. Then it went to another talk, and then somebody else heard about it. And locally, it spread. So what it showed, I guess, was there was this great need for it. And I never planned that. And then early on, Dan, maybe after 3 or 4 talks, again, I was strolling through Brighton, had a real synchronicity. I just bumped into I was going to grab some food, and there was a vegan sushi place. It did kind of like wraps, really delicious. Bumped in there. Turned out I recognised the woman who was in there, and I'd organised a ski holiday for her, a few years earlier, because I used to organise sort of bespoke ski holidays when I was based in the Alps. And so we got chatting. She recognised me, and we sat down. And it just turned out that she'd just begun her kind of raw food and juicing journey, and was so energized by the topic. And she was talking in the way that I love to talk about it. And I had this feeling, Dan, of like, oh my God, yeah, that's got me fired up again. That's amazing. She was excited about, looking into it, even putting on events about it. She was even talking about podcasts and talks. And I was kind of thinking, wow, that's where I'm at. And she said to me, so Sam, what are you up to now then, if you're not in the Alps? And I said, well, I'm talking about finance and crypto, actually. And she said these words, and she said, well, it's not much love in that, is there? There's not much nurture in that topic. And I had this feeling, and she was very well meaning. She was just being honest, and I really respected that, And it shook me down, because I felt like maybe I've fallen off my path. Maybe I should be, somehow I've been dragged away from talking what I want to talk about. And it shook me up for a couple of days, and I kind of sat with it. But over that time, what I realized was she was right. She absolutely was right. But it was a pivot in a different direction. It was right because what she said was, there isn't much love or nurture in this topic. And I realized, well, this is the topic that absolutely needs it.
Yes.
And already had been proven that there was a need for it and a demand for it. And I thought there are, I'd seen loads of people in my own networks, great healers talking about health in all that ways. But there was no one doing what I was doing and trying to bring that energy to this topic, which is so unspoken about, really, in groups or collective format. And from then, it just sort of galvanized me to go on. And I think not long after that, Dan, I was doing another talk. Deborah brought us to associates, and then met you, and it showed that the demand was there, and I felt really happy to be on that path. But it was a really interesting process, and it showed I had to follow where the energy was going, and had challenges on the way to question, hang on, should I be, where have I gone wrong? But actually, it was actually a test to go to see why I was doing this, and really crystallize the why. And I think that's been borne out by the response I'm getting. It just all organically give a talk, and then 3 or 4 people say that we need this discussion here, we need discussion here. And I'm absolutely passionate about that, Dan, because as you know, it's about getting the discussion going, bringing it out in the open, because so many people are feeling fearful on their own about this topic, and confused, as we've talked about, by a lot of the short form, disinfo, misinfo, binaries, or just misunderstandings. To bring a dialogue where people feel, okay, great, we can look at this holistically, is so important. And I think that's the feedback also that happened at Camp Out. And I'm really just pleased to be able to facilitate that dialogue, Dan. And it's been really rewarding to do that, and hopefully bring people out of fear, out of isolation, and into a context where they can discuss it and get creative with it, and take some of the sting out of this topic. So that was my way into it, and it's been borne out that it was needed, and here we are today talking about it still, and I continue to.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I appreciate you sharing that story as well, because it highlights the importance of the energy that's within the subject matter. Because you're right. I mean, there's plenty of love and nurturing in the healing space, health, wellness.
Yeah.
But finance itself is very black and white. It's very logic. It's like charts, but it's like anything. It's a highly emotive subject, and as such, it needs a degree of warmth and nurturing in order to bring it to the surface where people feel comfortable to discuss it, because it's almost become taboo to talk about finances in the public domain, particularly personal finances. You can talk about economics, but talking about personal finance or personal abundance, and there's so many layers to that. And I think your talk at Camp Out, brought that dimension to it, but it also highlighted things that people have been thinking about, but haven't had anywhere really to turn to explore it, which is so important. And, so many people were engaged with your talk, and I was walking across the field with one of the DJs who was playing in the evening, and was saying that it's so important that we bring these conversations to these types of spaces, community spaces really, and festival types of spaces, because they are so woefully lacking. It is so intrinsic in our day-to-day life. And the other dimension I think that's important, because of what's happened in the last few years, people have become acutely aware of the power dynamics in society. There's this reference to the elite and these kind of centralized organizations and entities that are kind of providing the driving force for the trajectory that society's on. But as a result, it's almost created this alienation towards money and abundance in itself, because people don't want to be. It's the classic, beliefs around our money that drive our behaviors around money. But people don't want to be associated with that kind of elite mentality, that controlling mentality. Therefore, they detach from the subject of money altogether, but also start to repel abundance. Even if their character is distinct, or even out of fear of being corrupted by money. And I think that's such a shame, because what it does is it creates a false limit upon ourselves. And I think this type of conversation is the sort of conversation that's needed as a gateway to be able to lean into the idea of abundance and and how personal sovereignty connects to our own ability to create and attract abundance.
So it's almost done that reaction to that world of money can actually entrench people into a sort of scarcity, more slave mindset, which is not helpful either, or it's not helpful to bring down that system either. So it's interesting. It actually suits that system for people to be railing against it and kind of having a visceral reaction against money and against that world. But actually that can lead to them remaining in servitude and kind of controlled by that debt. So it's an interesting dynamic playing out. And I think getting out of that and changing one's relationship with it is really important. And I think that's crucial. And I think, I often hear that line down of people say, I don't like economics, or I don't like the markets. I don't want to be involved. And, the reality is we're all in the market, and that's where I like to demystify the most simple things, like people, because the pound coins in their pocket aren't actually shrinking in size or growing, they believe that they're kind of just not in a market. Whereas when you can really demystify that actually the value of everything is being affected and being traded and having its own cycles, that things are changing all the time. So we are all involved in an economy. And, we can keep extracting ourselves and simplifying it, but I always give that argument, even if we're, bartering fruit on a tropical island, our money is, then become mangoes and bananas, and so we're looking at value, aren't we? Right, and that's why I think the word money almost has become weaponized, and people are scared of, And I had a really interesting. Then I had a client this week who said, who was starting to look at this topic, and a friend of hers said to her, "Oh, we just want to get rid of money." But then, what does that really mean? Because that's the association with money, as in the kind of fiat system we're used to. Getting rid of money, we say, well, does that mean a subsistent farmer in sub-Saharan Africa should get rid of his camels, or get rid of his livestock? Because that is what we're talking about. Money. We're talking about anything that's a unit of exchange or value. So I think that's really important to shift that idea about what money is, and that's kind of the baseline. So just getting to those levels in bigger discussions helps to transform people, and that's like the event you put on there, Dan, that weekend, having the time with people. Those things do start to change, and you're not going to get that just on sort of cold discussions about the market, what it's doing, on YouTube or anywhere, because it's not looking at. And I think what's great is we can bring both together. We look at all those angles. So yes, absolutely, I look at the charts, understand what's going on that level, but also at the fundamental levels, the hows and whys, and the basic values, and what we're trying to achieve, and how we're trying to improve our situation. So again, it's the holistic look down, which is so lacking.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful thing, because getting rid of money, I think that's a really interesting reframe, because when someone says that, I think it's trying to get to the core of what they're actually saying that they want to get rid of. Many people are kind of rallying against just mindless consumerism rather than conscious consumption, which are two different things. But it's interesting. I've just started listening to a new audiobook called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And at the very beginning of that book, he talks about, in the same way that we have financial markets, time used to be measured before, because we take for granted. I can see the clock on here, 10:38, as we're recording this on a Friday morning. We're so used to that linear notion of time. But prior to the advent of clocks, people measured time in very different ways. And prior to the Industrial Revolution, people measured time in different ways. We're so used to kind of hourly rates now of production. You're paid X amount per hour. People, according to the book, people used to compare time like we do in the financial markets. If you're looking at crypto against the pound, or the euros against the pound, or whatever, we always have something to compare and contrast. Whereas historically, we used to use time, and there's some funny examples in there, because they would compare how long it does to do something, like how long it takes to eat a mango. It will take you, or how long it takes to pee was one of the examples they used. So they'd say it's like 7 P's later. It's like, this is honestly how they used to communicate about time. So they related it to their abstract understanding of how long things take as a measurement. Now we've got hours, minutes, and seconds as a measure of time now. It'd be very difficult to take that away, but I think that important piece around a mode of exchange is still, no matter if you take money away, there's always going to be a mode of exchange.
Absolutely. So it becomes the money. It just rises up. So it's a concept, an idea of mode of exchange, rather than it being what you've maybe grown up associating money. And that's why looking at money in a bigger framework is really helpful.
And I think what it then points to is how we value things, because there's a real subjective perception creates reality, but perception also creates value. So what we deem to be valuable, gold is always used as this financial measure, historically, this financial measure. It's heavy, it's shiny, but really, why does that make it valuable? It's actually, if you think about it, if you really think about it, it's like we've got this heavy thing that's shiny, and we've decided that that's the measure of value we want to hold. But that's humans have learned through marketing and advertising that humans respond to shiny things. But if you actually start to look at it and go, you heard about shiny object syndrome. It's a thing.
And comes back to perception, Dan, which is why it's almost like it's so solid because you've lived with that belief all your life. But understanding that's still perception. So that's always where you get this argument. Well, between us, well, no, I like my cash, it's worth that, or Bitcoin's not worth anything, or well, no, gold is real. They all exist. I mean, some you can touch them more easily than others. And they all have a value, but understand that it is all perception. So sometimes people say, well, they don't even realize that even the fiat currency is based on how much people want it or not. So that's the old point, that the pound is shrinking and growing in your pocket, even though it stays the same size as a coin, because it's being traded as any asset. A currency falls when everyone leaves it. People can leave the pound. People can move to other currencies. That's what happened in South America. If people lose confidence in a currency, that's how we get to that level of hyperinflation. People leave that currency for another one. So understanding its perception, and just because you've had that perception for a long time, it feels solid and real, but it's still perception. Because the price of Bitcoin is the price of Bitcoin because that's what somebody wants to pay for it today. And same with gold. So it is sort of going to that different level of rethinking. Oh, right, it's not as solid as I thought, these whole ideas, and that part of the value in any monetary system, be it Dan shells or gold or mangoes, is the level of scarcity. If you need a unit of currency, it needs to be scarce, and it needs to not be able to be created in mass very cheaply, as fiat is. That's one of the problems with it. So looking at those examples and getting that fundamentals in place, which I would say, Dan, I was never taught at my A-level economics. This discussion never came up. We were lost. I say I did feel lost at the time. Straight into Keynesian supply side economics before it even looked at the basics of money. And this is where hopefully these foundational conversations can actually be a really good building block to build on from there, rather than going to these complex, very cold, theoretical sort of economic models, which do, understandably, unless you're really keen on that subject, really would be a turn off to 99% of the people, understandably.
Yes, yeah, and I think there's just this conversation brings up some of the practical things around intrinsic value and perceived value and how these things play out. But how we value things is what's important. If we value love, whether we value health, but if we're happy to value and expand our health, and we're happy to value and expand our relationships, then why are we not happy to value and expand our own financial abundance? It's almost like you go from you're happy to, these things are seen as holistic, but for whatever reason, money, this mode of exchange based upon, our value that we add to the world, actually through our contribution, through the work that we do, is therefore relegated to this secondary level where there's this resistance towards valuing money in the same way. Now, I understand there's lots of issues wrapped around money, which we've talked about a lot, but at its purest form, a mode of exchange, how I can contribute to you and how you can contribute to me, that's actually a very pure transaction.
Yeah.
Now, okay, we can get into all kinds of debate about how we perceive that value and what comprises of value, but nonetheless, if you bring it back to its purest form as a mode of exchange, a mode of contribution to one another, then I think there's a different energy, and I think that's so important because of what's happened in the last few years. The old adage of you'll own nothing and be happy. Well, people are starting to walk down that path anyway, voluntarily, because of their notion of what money means to them. And I think this is a very rocky road to walk down, when actually there's a different path that can be chosen that offers the opportunity for abundance in every area, health, relationships, and financial wealth.
I think your point, Dan, about value is so important, because even if you're in a barter economy, say we got rid of all means of it, because what the money really is a universal unit of exchange. That's what, with any monetary system, that's what you're trying to look at, because then it's easier to divide up and move around. But you're still doing the same essentially in a barter economy, because you're still weighing up, say one massage against building you a wall. You're still deciding how many massages equals building a wall. So in a sense, you could I'm being a bit comedic, but you could then build a financial chart of massages against building walls, and it would have its different levels, and it would find its level. So that's important to understand. All the monetary unit is doing is trying to create a universal unit that therefore you can move around at, even if somebody's not offering a massage at that time, or you don't need a wall. So that's where this shift to money's evil. Well, money is just trying to solve that problem, that issue, and make a more efficient one. So I think that's getting away this idea of it's just evil money. It's but in a sense it's just value, and it's a means of exchange, and that's exactly what we're still doing. When you're in that barter economy, you're still in an economy of value, and there are still units being built in, and it will evolve like that anyway. So it's important to have that mindset, because people always want to say get rid of money is almost an escapism idea of, I don't want to face these issues of working out what value is and what worth is, and how do I get what I deserve or offer for the right value. Those are all hard questions we all need to look at, but that is a monetary system, whether one likes it or not. So trying to sort of say let's just get rid of it all, again, is it doesn't really work. it's kind of a bit la la land in my view.
Yeah, well, value itself is incredibly hard to measure. Even if we were just to say, let's say we were to trade on like apples and oranges, right? Would you do it purely on weight? So I'll give you a kilogram of oranges for a kilogram of apples. That means you're going to get more apples, physical. You actually get a higher volume of apples than you would for your oranges. But then is weight the right measure? Because then it brings the volume equation to it. But then you start to look at the nutritional density. You look at where it was grown. Which one's actually better for our health. And all of a sudden, it becomes incredibly hard to actually.
And then we get to the tokenomics of apples, tokenomics of Bitcoin, which is the supply's suddenly gone up. There's a huge bump of crops, therefore they're abundant. Therefore, there's less. There's the price. The value, compared to other things goes down. So again, these conversations are really useful, I think, Dan, because people sometimes wouldn't look at economics in these simple terms, and I think demystifying and understanding that is going to be helpful for people.
Absolutely. Now, so the other component that reared its head for me at Camp Out was the need for us to have community conversations around these types of issues and have a support network around it, because it can be quite a personal journey. And sometimes we need to have a personal journey, but actually there's so much to be learned from the shared experience, learning from each other's wisdom, but also recognizing that we are going through this unique period in history. And in order to navigate it and make sense of it, we do need more and more people to bring different perspectives to it. What do you think is the power of community in this journey, particularly as we move towards this idea of decentralization?
Yeah, Dan. Well, that came up a lot for me in the sort of conversation I had following my talk for the next 2 days, where just in small groups on hay bales, or with individuals, or with couples, or with little groups that formed really organically, was I'm always talking about decentralizing one's assets, because we're talking about taking back as much sovereign control as we can and being more empowered, and that is really great. But one of the things I always want to bring to discussion is when I talk about assets, we're talking about everything. I think again, people of course go shrink to assets. That means cash, gold, crypto, houses. But assets, as you said, value. What's almost the most important asset in all of our lives are people around us, whether that's family, community, friends. Because I think most of us would admit here that we'd have all the asset wealth in the world. If we had nobody around us, would that give us any joy? No, and or real support or on this journey. So what I always talk about, Dan, is also look at that aspect. And if you can build that support network around you, and in a sense, you've decentralized some of the things you might have outsourced before. So you're bringing your network closer, even in a practical sense. You're not using faceless companies. You're dealing with people you've met, you trust, you have that feeling, and that transforms things, because there is so much pressure on being in these independent economic bubbles, which I would argue have been social engineered by design, because then people fall off their perch for whatever reason. There are just natural cycles, or people get ill, or they need support. If they're in bubbles on their own, isolated, then who does it fall upon? The state. The state can step in and support you, but as we know, with all the caveats involved. Now, that didn't used to happen when you had more family support and on a bigger scale, the kind of tribe. And that's what's so important, because although I'm saying, and I actually advocate take as many steps you can, even if you're on your own or in a couple in a small family, still take those steps you can. But the ultimate hedge against everything is a support network, then, because none of us naturally are always in abundance. That's also my argument. They've kind of created a world where to stay afloat, you need to be constantly in a chart doing that. And we know that charts don't do that. They have natural cycles, as we do in humans. So we have times where we're in abundance, and times where we're in a kind of cooling off period or whatever. And that can be emotionally, practically, on all levels, work levels, our income, our physical well-being. We need times where we're quiet. Now, if you're in an isolated bubble, then but you're in an economic world where it kind of relies on it, pressures you to always be increasing your income because costs are always going up. That's not a sustainable model, and there will always be people fall out of that. Now, if you've got that local support or that community support, family support, there are always people who step in, because that's that point. We're not all abundant all the time, but if one person's up, one person's down, then they do share their apples, or they do share, and that's the real power of a decentralized network, Dan. And I think that's one of the biggest traps they've got people in, and one of the biggest traps they're really going to leverage in this financial reset is they want to squeeze everybody. They are squeezing everybody. Everyone can see that happening. That will continue. and they will bail people out, save people into more dependence. That's always been my thesis, that it's not about making lots of people homeless or starving, and that leads to revolution. It's about creating the conditions where actually they need to be bailed out and, as we know, saved into the new system, which is the onset of universal basic income, and really being dependent on the state. And as we said, that's not sovereign, because you may not agree with the state's policies, as we've seen in the last few years. That gives them so much power. So having those networks is crucial, Dan. And the other aspect to it, which is, I fully respect, and I think it's an important thing to bring up because people feel under pressure, is that it's not everyone's skill set within a network to look at certain areas. So I think, people are really gallantly trying to cover all the different angles on their own. But naturally, we may be having some artists, some healers who go, hang on, finance really isn't my thing. And in a community, you'd have different parts of the community covering different aspects, because I'm of the belief, Dan, that we're all absolutely equal as, souls on this journey, but we're not equal in our skill sets. There's the real difference. We are all unique and we're all different. And I think harnessing within a bigger network people's skill sets so they can be the best they can be, but that lends, that skill to the group, and other people bring other skills. So as I say, people, I can be great at maybe helping with crypto and finance, but I'm not going to be able to grow carrots as well as somebody else. It's neither are better. They're both equal skills, but we need to share those skills, don't we? And harness them equally. Harness what I've been looking into, and other people, and I can harness what they've been looking to, and then we're all adding value together. And I think what that does, Dan, is once you've got that support, is it also takes a lot of pressure off your own situation. Because yes, I advocate for making progress and doing those things, but you can do them in a much more freed up way if you understand that you've also got support. Because there is no, as we talk about, there's no certainty. We're in uncharted territory, anything can happen. But in that sense, you're ready should anything happen, because you can fall back on the support of others and support each other. So I think that conversation is really important, because understandably some people, it isn't their skill set, and they feel I must get on top of this totally myself, and I haven't got time because actually I'm busy growing food and healing people. And my answer to that is, don't feel under pressure to do that. Yes, but maybe outsource maybe the expertise you've outsourced before, you decentralize that more. So you find people you trust and know locally or resonate with, and they can help you with that, as you would be able to help them with your skill set. And that is the power of decentralized networks, Dan, and now more than ever. And I think, it's a massive topic. I won't go too deep in it, but that's a lot of what the social engineering has achieved over this last 50 years, is the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of the tribes, the breakdown of those support networks, so that we are more controllable and in our small economic bubbles, and more vulnerable to the whims of centralized policy. And I think, as we've talked about, every step we can move further away from that and back to local support and networks is a great step on this journey.
Yeah, 100% with you on that one. I think it's really got me thinking about, how belief systems are constructed, and even axioms about how we perceive the world, and this perception piece. And it suddenly struck me as we were talking, this idea that money is evil or money is bad and money doesn't grow on trees, and all these stories that kind of perpetuate themselves. I'm just curious to myself as you were speaking, I was thinking, how many of those have been implanted to keep people poor, to keep people in scarcity? Actually, how many of those stories are by intent to stop people pursuing in order to maintain a power imbalance? I don't know, but I'm curious, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that.
Well, because Dan, an abundance mindset goes beyond just money. I mean, money's almost a side, is a part of abundance mindset. But sometimes I think people get over it, or having abundance mindset is just about getting more, figures on a screen. Abundance mindset leads to, in the people I've seen who embody it, and the times where I feel I embody it, it leads to drawing in amazing people, drawing in amazing opportunities. So money can be part of that because it's useful, but it is a bigger mindset. And I think you're absolutely right. The scarcity mindset is perpetuated endlessly by the social engineers for many reasons. Whether we talk about that in terms of energy, in terms of all sorts, that's a really important mindset to control people. The belief that it's scarce, and the belief that there isn't enough resources. I think that is a huge psyop.
Well, yeah, it is, and that's been so brutally permeated into our culture, as part of this overall, social engineering project, if you will. along with actually it plays into the role of community. There is now there's a counter reaction. So we've got this kind of technocracy now where the experts are the ruling class, but we've also simultaneously got this like rallying against the experts because of what happened during COVID, and it's played out in a very very damaging way. But it's important that now your point is that we don't then feel the burden of having to learn everything ourselves, because the trusting no one thing that is emerging amongst this problem that we're witnessing does also lead to the breakdown of community, and it also leads to this like almost intrinsically individualistic path where you feel like you have to do everything yourself, which is a heavy burden to carry. So coming back to those decentralized, localized networks, finding those voices and experts that you trust mean that you can then share knowledge and wisdom, which is how tribes traditionally thrived, is that they would gather knowledge and share knowledge and resources amongst the tribe. And Camp Out was a really great example of that as well. We had one of the most challenging but beautiful things about Camp Out is we didn't make it for this type of person or that type of person with this type of story or this type of speaker. With crypto, for instance, the financial story, it would be very easy to put on a crypto conference where all you talk about is crypto, but you miss everything else that relates to it. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't put on a crypto conference or a health conference or anything that's subject matter.
You could end up in an echo chamber then, can't you?
You end up in echo chambers. So Camp Out was deliberately created as a community gathering where we did bring together decentralized solutions, localized expertise, knowledge around healthy living, personal empowerment, political transformation, nature connection, all of these different things where people were bringing their knowledge, their wisdom into a space where people can then galvanize what's happening there, pick and choose the things they want to lean into, but then pass it on. And that was one of the key threads, because we had this packed program. People were saying, I'd love to go to all of it. I said, well, so would I. So would I. But the part of the goal is that we would then have these conversations around the campfire where people would be sharing what they've learned, because that's how communities grow. Historically, people would go beyond their own communities into other communities. They would bring back other resources, but they'd bring back other knowledge that they shared with the village or town that they belong to. So it almost comes down to that like instant gratification of wanting it all now, that drives that inclination of I need to be here, there, and everywhere. Well, actually, we can relax into it and say, well, you know what? There's going to be people over there. I'm going to talk to them later on. I'm going to see what they got, because mastery comes from teaching others what we know. So there's the opportunity to teach and share our knowledge and skills, but there's also the opportunity to receive. And again, that's the giving and receiving dimension of abundance. It's always in flow. So I think
you gain so much more from getting more data points down, because I think that's the danger of the, I like the No More Heroes tag, which is important to, not putting anyone in the pedestal and saying I'm following their path, because you are the hero of your own journey. And what you get, like at Camp Out there, you always get lots of different perspectives, and that's going to help you be more discerning, because you listen to everyone, but follow no one. Is my kind of mantra, which is there's value everywhere, but you'll get a much better idea. And the most important decentralized aspect is, and I think the danger of our society, even pre-COVID or whatever, but even within the world today where so much is happening online, is that you can be, it's dealing with people you have met and get a feel for, and you get so much more from that energetic media. Somebody very kindly said, I think a listener of this podcast kindly said, I love what you're doing online, but you really came alive for me in a in-person setting. Thank you for that. Because I do enjoy it. And part of that, Dan, is because I really enjoy the projection, but you do get a lot more feeling from it. And I think absolutely we use these tools, which is why we're doing this podcast. It's great. But when you're really looking at close networks, it's great to be able to speak to them directly. And obviously that's what we try to harness with some of what we're doing with the Financial Reset Group, is that you're able to interact. Because if you can get really good info from a channel or watch it, but if you're just in a passive mode, you're not able to ask the questions that come out as the conversation's going. So it does become binary, even with good info. And I think being able to be involved in that conversation, which is what Camp Out brought very viscerally, Dan, but even that can happen online. But being in a conversation, as we've tried to nurture with the Financial Reset Group that we've got, is that it's a two-way thing. I always say, when I give a talk, it's not about me pontificating, it's about our shared perspectives, but I want to hear what's concerning you or how you view it or what you do. we get so much more from that. And I think this idea, even with good people listening, is just being receiving that, but not being involved in the conversation, because we all need to be involved, and we can all learn each other. And we all add value. And I think following people you've never had an interaction with, it can be dangerous. I mean, listen and get stuff, but to put people on pedestal and say they know because they're talking to me and I like what they say, go beyond that, I think is really important. That's part of the journey.
Yes, one of the first principles in my previous brand, Unstoppable Media, which was number one, was there is no way, only your way, because that plays out because there are so many different ways we can do things, and there's still the inclination when you come to an event like this, and people are looking for the answer or the solution.
Yeah.
And there'll always be people who say they have the solution, and I always shy away from that, because even if you break down, there was the analogy used with activism, when there's a house on fire, everyone just needs to grab a hose and put the thing out. And I said, well, to a degree that is true, but when there's multiple houses burning, how do you identify where to put your resources? And if everyone's just grabbing hoses, no one's paying attention to the fact there's children in that house and they actually need to be grabbed. There's communication that needs to be required. There's additional supplies that are going to be needed. There's emotion. So we often fall into this trap of we must all do this one thing in order for this result.
Yeah.
And I think that's dangerous level thinking. But there are people who will try, and when we're in our vulnerable state, which is what online can put us in that state, because the energy at Camp Out, there's pockets of like the fear, like people's fear-based energy kind of rising up. But it's very quickly neutralized by this loving kind of positive energy. There's a very uplifting, inspiring vibe across. And there were so many people who said that finally, because they were breaking free from the kind of online world and coming into this kind of space, they felt free again. They felt themselves again. They felt they were able to share their story. And it is so important that we do share our stories, because you're right, Sam, in that shared learning experience, we learn so much from each other's stories. We learn the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we can take perspectives. We don't have to take someone else's story as gospel and say that's the thing, but it can help inform us and help us to make sense of our own. And it's very interesting, because when I watch all the different speakers at Camp Out, some people go straight into telling their personal story, other people go straight into principle, but both are equally important. And when people start to say things like that person's telling their story, they're in their ego, it's not correct. It's not accurate. It's actually story. Story helps us to build a bond, because we can relate to one another, but it also helps us to see ourselves through someone else. So actually, I've been through lots of different forms of speaker training over the years. People always say, how do you speak so well? Well, I practice it like anything else. But it's actually, stories are actually what have always united us as people. So when people get shot down for sharing their story, that's incredibly dangerous, because stories are powerful. Stories enable us to see ourselves. And when combined with principles, when combined with the lessons, that's when we can really start to see things, knowledge and wisdom growing. So seeing those stories being shared at Camp Out, around the campfire, on the hay bales, as you mentioned, in reflection for me, next time we do something like this, I would love to have more conversation space. We can have more expansion of the conversation, more sharing. Because I think that's truly where people start to understand and find wisdom.
100%, Dan. You made me think of David Charalambous' work, who was there, at Camp Out, and it's great to see David. He's always talked about this last few years, reaching people through stories. Because everyone's got a story, and there's value, rather than sort of going at, going with sort of binary facts and saying this. We respond naturally. I mean, that's part of the, oral tradition of our world of, oral poetry. You talk about the greatest storyteller, which is the hero's journey, was Homer's epics, Dan. Homer's The Odyssey, that was never actually written down. That was oral poetry handed down. And the stories are so powerful because it encapsulated, and they're still very relevant today. And that's why, people might not be aware, but almost every single film in the world is based on the Odyssey, almost the hero's journey. And it might have a twist and be, it's been subverted to the anti-hero's journey. But those oral traditions of storytelling are crucial to society. And I think nurturing them again is great. And your point, Dan, is, I often say it, there's a caveat to almost every sentence. That every sentence I say, I could go on a rabbit hole, related to it, because you can just on a soundbite, which is why we kind of sometimes feel reticent about doing anything short form, is because on a soundbite, even well intentioned, somebody can go somewhere and go, well, that means that, and then they're off on Whereas really in person, they could say, well, hang on, you said that, and I go, oh, well, actually, and here's the other perspective, and here's the other perspective, and here we go. And that's what leads, that conversation is always much more satisfying than somebody walking away with a soundbite, because they could misinterpret it, not look at it holistically. So the conversations bring that down, don't they? And that's where I love the in-person, I love the group stuff we do, because I don't have that feeling. And I love people to bring up things in the questions here. Don't just hear it as an echo chamber. Respond and say, well, what about that aspect or that aspect? Because that's what's important. Don't want people to go away with just sound bites. I want people to think, hang on, that's made me think that, but what does that mean? And that was the beauty, what I experienced in in-person events where I do Q&A, and Camp Out was almost, even better than that. Well, it was better because actually we had, rather than me extending one of my talks to being kicked out of a venue, after 4 or 5 hours, we had a couple of days to really sit with it. Maybe people come back and talk again. And rather than that being, that was amazing, rather than that being, something you go to, every few months, but nurturing that as a regular part of our world is what's going to be transformative, Dan.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask what's next in terms of facilitating local groups and actions and things like that. And I think, we're looking at that sort of thing, but at the same time, the whole message of the event is actually take that inspiration and go build it. Build it in your area. That was always the philosophy for Camp Out. Don't come and tell us the bins are overflowing. Take the bin and take it. It's actually taking personal responsibility. And I think for people thinking, well, there's nowhere in my area to do this, take the initiative, because we heard about the origin story of Stand in the Park at the event, and Brady in Australia would just go and stand in the park by himself for weeks on end until finally someone said, "Why are you standing in that park? What are you doing there?" And there's so many Stand in the Parks that start that by one individual standing by themselves in their sovereignty for truth and freedom until others emerged. And it's taking the courageous leap to be that leader, because you don't need a credentials or a title to be a leader in life. You just need the initiative and courage to do so. And I think what Camp Out was all about was fostering that sense of empowerment so that people can take the initiative for themselves and say, you know what, like you did, saying there's no nurturing or love in this conversation. It's the right thing to do. I'm going to follow that instinct, that initiative, and create something that wasn't there, because there is so many opportunities for us to do that right now. There are also so many opportunities for us to decentralize, Sam. And one of the things that came away for me from Camp Out, and I was thinking about this in the context of decentralization, we had lots of these brilliant conversations about minimum viable, like what's the simplest steps that we can take. Last year we had some stuff on going off grid, and it would be like how to go completely off grid, which is a lot of steps, and for a lot of people to unplug that far, is not actually desirable for a lot of people.
Not realistic or desirable, or even what's going to be their best path either.
So I'm curious now, like that idea of minimum viable decentralization, like what? And I was thinking, like, how can I take further steps to unplug from the current system that is like comfortable, easy steps? Whether it's changing my email provider or all these different things. So I'm curious, in the context of the conversations we had at Camp Out, where do you see some of those simplest steps into becoming more decentralized could be for people?
Well, I'm so glad you said steps down, because you always hear me when we have the the group calls or the webinars is take steps, and when you're just taking steps that are viable for you, you always feel more empowered. If you try and bite off more than you can chew, and you're trying to go for the ultimate panacea, often that leads to greater stress, and you feel less empowered. So it almost come back to your gut and think, I always say to people, whatever decision you're going to make, do you feel better for having made it, or do you feel more scared and less empowered? And that's your barometer. That's unique to you, and only you can know that. So I always say I can suggest lots of different steps, but you have to come back to you, sit with it, and go, every step I take actually was something that made me feel more empowered, not put me in a situation where actually I'm more scared than I was before. And I think that is the danger down now. We talk about the sort of puritanism, or that extreme level of you must do this. You're not sovereign unless you've gone fully off grid. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. Whereas that is not viable for a lot of people. But a lot of the other small steps are viable. And what they've done is they've always improved your position.
Yes.
And I always talk about that, improving it. So, for me, even the financial state is you've improved your situation if you've got some of your assets into self-custody. You're less centralized. You've got some different asset classes. For me, local speak family, we've found somebody who grows food, and there's an energy exchange there. So there's food coming locally. So it's just adding these little islands of decentralization, bringing them as part of your ecosystem. And every time you've got one, even if it's a small thing, even if it's one veg box a week from people who are growing organically, and it's great produce, you've improved your situation. You don't have to go to, well, I'm completely off grid now and I'm not doing that. And I think you can really enjoy the process. And what I talk about, Dan, is settling into the process, settling into the improvement and embracing the journey rather than feeling panicked, as in, I've got to get somewhere. I don't even know where it is, but I've got to get there quickly. And I've seen people, understandably act out of fear, do that, and it's not worked, and they've had to come back. And I'm not criticizing that, because that was a valid thing, they learned from it. But if you can settle into and you feel overwhelmed, just settle into improving it. We talk about it at a level like, I've now got a decentralized Web3 browser. My search engine is pre-search rather than Google. My browser is Brave rather than Chrome. I've got some Bitcoin as well as some fiat currency. I've got some gold and silver as well. All these aspects are all improvements. And I think, we've talked about the overwhelm and the scale of what's going on at those levels. People can be overwhelmed by this idea of having to get free of everything in a panacea, rather than settling to, we're on an amazing journey and we are pioneers, and giving ourselves a pat on the back for even being on the journey, even for showing up and saying, I want to be on the journey, because that's what a lot of people are not answering that call. We're answering that call. Every step you take on that journey, give yourself some respect and, and a pat on the back. And so I was thinking, keep evolving, keep improving it, and don't rush, And I think that's what we've talked about, Dan. Everyone getting empowered at a viable level, a sustainable level, is what's going to create much more solid growth. Because then we can build. If you tried to then expand Camp out to huge too early, I mean, people would see this in business or anything. If you try and go, you just want to get somewhere too quickly, it doesn't work. So let's continue building those networks and those routes. And I know, Dan, every time I do an event, I meet more people, I get more perspectives. I feel like my ecosystem is growing without forcing it, just by staying on my path. So that's my kind of take, Dan. And I think steps is important. Steps rather than thinking there's an end gaming it. Because if you even got to what you thought was your end game, it would still actually be just the next step. And the challenges would still be there, but in a different way. So settle into it is I never mean that in a way of like not defeated at all, but settle into this journey, this process. We're on it, we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, when I first started my business 11 years ago, 2012, I was so focused on the ultimate end game, the old end result. That I missed, I got so overwhelmed by that. It seemed so far away, and it paralyzed me. It led to overwhelm. It led to analysis paralysis. And I became so fearful of the journey and started questioning, who am I to do this? Can I, do I have the skills? Do I have the power? Is it possible? But when you look at the very next step, you look right down and go, oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
And, no matter how many times I'd heard it, greatness is one step taken at a time. But the reality is that's true. We see the overnight success stories that don't actually exist. You don't see the whole trail of work that was done before them and all the struggles and the failures and the lessons and the learnings. It's just taking that first step. So I love what you said about the food. I had the privilege of going to see Rich and Nick Stone at the Nourish community nearby here in Bournemouth, just outside of Bournemouth. And they, Nick also did a session at Camp Out. And they've got this amazing garden they've built. And I looked at that, I was like, I would love to have a garden like that. But straight away I went to I'm not sure I could pull that off. But I could buy a box of their food.
Yeah.
And I'm in the game. I'm getting my food from a beautifully created space. And they said, actually, for people like you, Dan, we give talks on how to build, it was a minimum viable again, how to build, how to start growing small amounts of herbs and things with no attention required. So it's of course I've got soil out there, I can put this in there, and I have done some growing before, but I'm using the example to show that actually there are minimum viable steps that we can take to get on the path. And people feel I need to grow my own food, food scarcity, this scarcity kicks again, food scarcity. I need to grow everything. But if you don't love it, and I said this to some people who were growing, they were doing it completely out of fear. I was like, you do realize you're sowing the fear into the ground. What impact is that going to have? Can't you do it for the love of it? And they're like, actually, we do love it. And it's like,
Yeah.
beauty. Like, there's no point doing something if you don't get the joy from it. So,
And it's not going to work. It's not. And
no.
it's almost going back to what's your skill set, what your skill set really is, and whereas that whatever project you do with that's going to work.
Yes.
Whereas trying to say I'm going to cover these bases because I think I should or I need to, like you said, Dan, it might not even work that well. And that's where good mentors of mine always explained to me years ago that a lot of very successful people, they don't try and cover every base. They've got somebody who's about knocking down doors to certain things, because they're the creative person. Well, they need somebody who knocks down doors to business deals or to everybody's got their skill set. And I think trying to cover it all yourself is not sustainable. But like you said, Dan, you found people who are great. You've decentralized because you know where your food's coming from. You know it's grown with love. That's amazing. It's also progressed your journey of thinking about, I might start growing a few herbs, and but you're not going, right, I've got to get a market garden. I've got a podcast, I've got an Elevate
Yes.
network, I've got Camp Out, and now, right, we dig the gun. Again, it's this kind of feeling you'd end up in burnout. Who would that actually help? Would that help your family? Would that help community? What can happen actually is collapse your other projects now.
Totally.
So I think it's outsourcing, but not outsourcing in the way we used to, or the society's come to, which is to faceless, companies, people we've never met, big corporations. That's the outsourcing that needs to stop. Doesn't mean outsourcing needs to stop, but that network is shrunk, and it has come closer, and it's come to people you have a connection with. And I love that. Then is like the more produce you buy, just it's a good experience, because not even just eating the food, it's going to that person's garden and picking it and having a discussion with them. That's amazing. And I think I go back to the point of getting out of endgame anything, because I remember Viscera in 2020, and it was really intense. We know all that. But there's people talking about endgaming it. When are we going to win, or we'll do this? But life's happening right now. This is life. Whether it's don't forget to enjoy the present moment, and that's all we have. And that's you're making plans, and you're being proactive, and you're increasing, and you're not forgetting that life is happening right now. This is it. There isn't somewhere to get to. You could answer, we need to get there so we can start living. Well, no, it's happening right now. So that's why at Camp Out, Dan, it was the perfect blend for me of, we're looking at solutions, and we're looking at issues and how we can tackle that, and we're having fun. We're laughing. It was amazing. Amazing. Richard Vogue spoke. We had a great. He did some amazing physical comedy that I've not seen on his channel before, but in person, that was amazing, Dan, and that was really so much fun. And then we had, I loved Peter Conway's music. We had everything. We had all these different aspects, and I saw you in the Vortex for the. With the Christian D'Souza, was it? Amazing 5 rhythm stuff. So it's again, it's both and. We're looking at solutions, we're working hard, and we're enjoying life at the same time. We're doing and that's the holistic side. And we can all, understandably, drift off into different areas, but bringing that balance back in is amazing. And that's what I want to harness is, evolution, learning, whatever, and fun, and
yes.
whole gamut.
Yeah, have fun was our secret principle, number 11 of our 10 principles. But I think we've agreed, like, next year, next thing, we get the principle number 1, like fun. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
No.
And then the old adage, you fall in love with the process and the results will come. Because if you're waiting for that distant endpoint for the vision to fully realize, and everything feels like struggle and picking a rock up a mountain until you get there, then, well, of course there's going to be challenges, of course there's going to be struggles. But if you're enjoying the process, and that also the hardest lesson I've learned is trying to do too much myself.
Yeah,
that's where the joy starts to sap out of it, when you actually got other people around you that have the skills. So, like, what's joy for someone is pain for someone else, and what's pain for others is joy for them. So it's they're doing all the detailed accounting and things like that, which is not my joy zone. Well, there wouldn't be accountants.
No, and asking for help is a skill in itself, Dan.
100%.
I think it really is, and asking for help, but it is out there. But knowing, not feeling that guilt, and I think people can feel guilt and shame that they've got to cover it all themselves, and that's just ridiculous.
Yes.
Asking for help, but it's about finding the right help and the help that's in tune with you, and that's where I come away. Not help from faceless entities and faceless large corporations or states that I'd argue don't have your best interest. Find the help and support from people you resonate with, and it's there. And like you said, the things that you don't enjoy, they actually enjoy, and they'll enjoy helping you. And there's a great exchange there, and that's what I'm passionate about. And that's what Camp Out, got me excited about.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, to me, it's about conscious, healthier choices.
Yeah,
It's being awake, if you will. It's being aware of our own decisions and our own relationship with what's happening in the world. And you've summed it up beautifully there. And the whole rationale really for Camp Out is to create the space for that to occur. But similarly, it's the whole rationale for what we're doing here. It's creating the space for people to explore things, to deepen their understanding, so that they can make more informed, empowered choices with the things that feel right to them. So, that's what we're here for. If you've just discovered the show, you saw Sam at Camp Out, or you're new to the Uncharted Territory podcast, we're up to about episode 20. I think we're on episode 22 right now. Apologies if I get the numbers wrong, but we've recorded some really expansive conversations around things related to the financial reset, crypto. So do have a look at the back catalogue. We've also put together a couple of other experiences for you, which you can find out about weareelevate.org/reset. We've got our Navigating the Navigating Digital Assets course. It's a self-study course to learn the good, the bad, and the ugly of crypto, blockchain, and what's going on in the financial reset. And then to deeper your knowledge of the financial reset and to be part of more of that supportive type community, we've got the Navigating the Financial Reset program. Community, we could call it, actually, because there is a community. We gather twice a month. Our next session's coming up actually this week. This is being released on Tuesday, and our next session's on Wednesday night. So if you're watching this on Tuesday, the 22nd of August, our next session's on Wednesday, the 23rd, 8 p.m., where it's all about us coming together and sharing ideas, imparting wisdom, yes, but also engaging with one another to actually navigate this together. Because as Sam said earlier on, nothing is certain, and therefore, we have to embrace that uncertainty. But the best way we can embrace uncertainty is actually exploring it together to actually bring, as we've talked about today, those different components from the community together to actually make sense of it all, so we can make those empowered choices. Sam, would you like to say anything else about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, totally. It's that support that frees. I'm thinking about it in all sense of what I've done. When you've got that support and that network, you feel freed up to play more and to maybe take risks that you wouldn't take, because you've got that support network to explore them and maybe discuss them after. So I think about it even in my old life in the Alps, and I was into big mountain skiing, that was thing, with a real core group of people I trusted. We were able to push our limits and do things that I wouldn't have been able to do on my own, not because I didn't have the skill set on my own to ski certain lines or do things, but it was that collective support and weighing up and getting info and that made things possible. And I think that's the same thing with these networks, Dan, is that on your own, it may feel a step that's too much, but knowing that it's a step you take and discuss it and have that support change everything and frees up to play more. So I say that baseline of having support will then free us up to be more creative, actually, because that's where the creativity is, where the magic happens. But if you don't feel supported, then understanding you can be in fear, and fear is the mind killer and really blocks creativity, as we know. So that's what I really want to harness, is getting us out of fear into creativity in all aspects. And obviously with our program, we're looking at shifting the energy around finance, money, and this reset, and not being fearful, but actually being proactive and making the most of the opportunities that arise, that we can then harness even more projects in the future. So come to it from a real positive side, and give a holistic view. And that's what I'm passionate about, and so are the people who are joining these communities.
Absolutely, yes. If you'd like to find out more about that, go to weareelevate.org/reset. Please do subscribe to this podcast to get notified of our latest episode. We are going to be expanding the channels. We were talking about whether we're going to make our way onto TikTok later on for short form content. Lots to discuss. We're both energized and inspired by our time together at Camp Out.
Yep.
Only the second time we've actually been together in person, Sam. Back to digital now. Sam said you're taller than I thought, because on a screen we've got these.
He is. Anybody's not seen Dan. He's taller. He's taller than he looks next to me, because here we're on a level playing field, Dan. But really, he's much taller.
Yeah. So, thanks as always to our listeners and viewers. Really appreciate you being with us. Please do share this, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Uncharted Territory podcast.